Hello and welcome to my character analysis of Six from Little Nightmares. Six is the protagonist of Little Nightmares, which was released in 2017. It is a horror puzzle platformer developed by Tarsier Studios. Later in 2021, Little Nightmares 2 was released and acts as a prequel to the first installment. In the first game, Six is the main character and the one directly controlled by the player. She is depicted as a lone survivor navigating the hostile, nightmarish world of the Maw, driven by hunger and survival instincts. In the second game, Six plays a supporting role, with a new protagonist, Mono, taking the lead. For the purpose of this analysis, I will be focusing on Six as a main character in Little Nightmares 1. Six's character changes throughout the game series, which greatly impacts how the design will be read and interpreted. Taking this into account in a detailed way in this analysis would go beyond the scope, so I will only mention such impacts briefly here. The first game emphasizes her small, fragile nature, reinforcing themes of helplessness and struggle for survival in a world dominated by grotesque, monstrous adults. In Little Nightmares 2, the themes revolve more around companionship, trust, and eventual betrayal. Six is instantly recognizable due to her simple silhouette. Her body is designed to be reminiscent of a child with a low head-to-body ratio. This petite form contrasts dramatically with the towering environment and monstrous figures around her. In comparison, this emphasizes her vulnerability and fragility. The contrast is further emphasized by the short and thin limbs of Six in contrast to the long, grotesque arms of the enemy characters. Her face is largely hidden beneath her hood, which obscures her emotions and adds a sense of mystery. This choice invites players to project their own feelings of fear, anxiety, or determination onto her. The lack of overt expressiveness in her design makes her a vessel for the player's emotions, while also suggesting her internal struggle with her identity in such a dehumanizing world. The most recognizable aspect of Six's design, the oversized yellow raincoat and hood, remains largely unchanged throughout the entire game series. This continuity helps anchor the character visually, ensuring players immediately recognize her as the same figure from Little Nightmares 1. Of course, this can also be used as a means to deceive the player. Six's design is deliberately built to serve the gameplay mechanics of stealth and survival. Her small size allows her to hide in tight spaces, and her lack of physical strength encourages players to focus on clever evasion rather than confrontation. The simplicity of Six's design, especially the bright yellow raincoat, ensures that players can easily track her movement and location. Her distinct silhouette and color help maintain visual clarity even when the environment becomes chaotic or cluttered. In Little Nightmares 2, the raincoat contrasts not only with the grim world, but also with the new protagonist, Mono, who is more muted in his appearance. This contrast makes Six stand out even more, reflecting her importance and her distinct role in the game's narrative, despite being a supporting role in the second game. The bright yellow raincoat ensures that Six is always visible against the dark and muted environments. It makes her easily trackable by the player amidst the chaos and clutter of the grotesque settings. The choice of a comparably desaturated world with a splash of yellow emphasizes Six's presence and gives her a sense of individuality in an otherwise bleak world. The raincoat's material is smooth and reflective, contrasting with the rough, grimy textures of the world around her. The simplicity of her clothing, no accessories or extraneous details, makes her seem even more defenseless and out of place in this terrifying world. Despite the stylized shape, the raincoat's texture feels realistic enough to ground Six in the environment. It enhances the sense that she is a real child navigating an impossible world. Her bare feet and the absence of other clothing items create a stark contrast between her childlike appearance and the cold, dangerous surroundings, adding to her sense of vulnerability. In Little Nightmares 2, Six's acquisition of the raincoat mid-game feels symbolic. It signifies a return to the character players remember, but also marks the moment of transformation. The environment turns from a threat into a playground. Six changes from being exposed and utterly vulnerable to being warm and sheltered inside the raincoat. It provides shelter from the outside world, but also enables play in otherwise bad and dangerous environments. It grants a certain amount of self-governance where there was none before. In the first game, Six's design evokes sympathy and protection from the player, as she is a small, innocent figure in a nightmarish world. In the second game, her design retains this visual innocence, but is layered with a new sense of danger and unpredictability. Her small stature and childlike appearance now serve as a deceptive mask for a more complex, darker character, foreshadowing the climactic betrayal of Mono. The game rarely gives her a confident or powerful stance, reinforcing her role as a survivor rather than a hero. Six's movements are subtle, reinforcing her small size and vulnerability. Her running animations are quick and frantic. The crouched, sneaky movements, especially when avoiding enemies, highlight her cautiousness and survival instincts. Six's walk cycle feels fragile, with a lightness that emphasizes her childlike form. Her footsteps are often cautious and quiet, which aligns with her need to remain unseen in a dangerous world. The weight of her movement communicates her vulnerability and isolation. Her running animation shows a more determined pace, the movements get bigger, and the sounds louder. The sound of her bare feet on the ground pull the player back to how exposed and fragile Six is after all. Six's idle animations, like fidgeting with her raincoat or shivering in the cold, reinforce the sense that she is constantly uncomfortable and fearful in her surroundings. This again reinforces her vulnerability and fear in the nightmarish world. In the first game, Six doesn't engage in combat directly, but the way she interacts with objects, like pushing open heavy doors or dragging items, reinforces her physical weakness. Her slow, methodical actions when manipulating objects create tension, especially in a moment of panic for both Six and the player. Thus, the player is acutely aware of her physical limitations in a very hostile environment. In Little Nightmares 2, she plays a more active role in helping Mono evade or even fight enemies. This is in direct contrast with the comparatively passive role she takes in the first game, despite being the main character. Six's face is largely hidden, but this serves to enhance the mystery of her character. The lack of visible facial expressions forces the player to focus on her body language and movement to interpret her emotional state. This design choice adds to the eerie, detached atmosphere of the game and makes her seem more enigmatic and possibly emotionally numbed by her circumstances. There is no spoken dialogue from Six, and this silence reinforces her role as a passive observer and survivor. In the second game, this can be interpreted as a deliberate reserve to hide her true intentions or detachment. In the first game, Six's design represents the ultimate struggle for survival. Her childlike appearance and vulnerable movements evoke sympathy and fear for her well-being. Her actions, including the shocking ending where she consumes the gnome, show how the nightmare world has corrupted her innocence and permanently changed her. She is both a survivor and a predator. The raincoat reflects this perfectly, as it acts as a shelter from the outside world, which means it can also act as a way to hide her true self from it. In a sense, Six can interact with the nightmares around her and turn them into a sort of playground with the raincoat on. The evolution in Six's design from a fragile, sympathetic protagonist in Little Nightmares 1 to a more ambiguous, even sinister figure in Little Nightmares 2 shows a deliberate shift in her role within the narrative. Her static design remains mostly consistent, but her animations, behavior, and interactions with Mono introduce an ambiguity that was not present in the first game. This development was foreshadowed in Little Nightmares 1 by Six eating a gnome, one of the innocent NPCs, despite the first game being chronologically later than the second game. Whether this foreshadowing was deliberate remains debatable, though. The choice to keep her visually similar while changing only her behavioral design enhances the surprise and emotional weight of the betrayal at the end of Little Nightmares 2. The design plays with player expectations, using familiarity to create a sense of trust, only to subvert it in the end.